The diagram is reproduced over 60 million times each year by companies other than London Transport. Extraordinary. Extraordinary. Really is an interesting question as to why. Is it because it's just been, as it were, forced on to as a tourist icon? Or is it something within the diagram itself? But anyway, look, you can, I sometimes think I should, because I have to give this as a talk, I think I should probably buy a full set. Look, you can have everything. Even underwear. I would have thought most tube journeys were too short. But maybe it's love at first sight that you want to remember it. But you can even bath. Your shower curtain. More could you wish for? It's rather nice, actually. So finally, though, the LUD is an extraordinary example of design-led innovation, and all the more interesting, and that's created by a designer who was not a designer. This is what I really love about this. There are you guys spending $50,000 a year to come and get it. Harry Beck did one of the greatest designs of the 20th century, and he never went to art school. Two questions immediately arise. How did it come to be, and what's the significance of the design cognitive revolution that the LUD makes? What does this tell us about design revolution? What lessons can we learn about it? What lessons we can learn about innovation is, my takeaway for you last week was how to get rich. My takeaway for you this week is how to innovate as powerfully as Harry Beck. What do I mean by design-led innovation? I mean design-led innovation by those that are led primarily not by technological innovation or scientific discovery, but by a non-technologically dependent change in the operative configuration of something. So it's taking that operative configuration, that's the key word I want to be. So not primarily technology, may use technology, not primarily. Remember I said a configuration is a twofold thing. It's first the structure of something and how that structure is disposed or enabled to act. Remember we did this is the finches on the Galapagos Islands, where their beaks are precisely adapted to the kind of food they eat. Exactly adapted. Each finch with a particular beak eats a particular kind of fruit, or not perfect example here of that kind. And here's a 20th century example of design configurative innovation. It's the little English mechanic car, first came out in 1959. Immortalized bottom left in a wonderful film called The Italian Job, if anybody has seen that film. It's total entertainment, very British, 1960s. But it concerns a bank robbery in Turin in Italy. And the escape is done through little minis that drive through Turin, literally through people's houses, through squares, around the Fiat race track, and eventually down the sewers and escape. It's through the mini. It's a wonderful, very nice car. Watch it if you. But the design innovation, the really interesting one, was to create a car so small, little, cheap, was to mount the engine transverse to the axis, not along the axis of the car, but you can just see in that first sketch there, one of the first sketches for the Mini done by its designer. Somewhat dangerously, you do notice in that first sketch, the gas tank is right in front of you. Quite terrifying, but utterly never noticed that before. Can't even imagine how that could be sketched. It's quite frightening. But this is a beautiful example of a design-led innovation. It's nothing technologically, totally transformative. In fact, the car was incredibly badly engineered. You see the first version of the Mini, they're just awful, badly made. Now it's quite a wonderful little car. It's a reincarnation, the same principle. But that was a design-led innovation and led to some very good design rents. Design rents, by the way, are the extra profits you get from designing something innovatively. So how do innovations get made? A note on designers and circumstances. Here's a really interesting proposition. It comes from Michael Baxendall's book, Patterns of Intention. is talking about Picasso and Braque, and he makes a very interesting proposition, which is counterfactual to all the ideas we have about where artist's individuality is. We think of an artist's individuality in terms of like his brushwork, as it were. Baxendale says no. A painter registers his individuality by his particular perception of the circumstances he must address. Indeed, if one is to think of a painter expressing himself, it is most of all here in the analysis of his environment, which schematically speaking precedes the process of painting itself, that one can most securely locate an individuality. Now, that's a really interesting proposition. You are individual not by your brushwork, but by how you perceive how you are in the world. There is often a curious impersonality about the actual working out of a solution in the medium, because that's it. Painter's medium of forms and colours is almost as impersonal as the structural properties of steel. But the painter's formulation of a brief is a very personal affair indeed. That is to say, what questions the painter is going to attack. Now, this is a very interesting proposition. It just shows you about the analysis of circumstance in a particular way as leading to, in effect, originality. We're now talking about Picasso in 1906-07, the invention of cubism, the one time that Picasso became a really good artist. Now, context here, we're back to context in Jones. The context which is often, Jones says, the hardest thing to perceive because it influences our ways of thinking. The fish can't see the water. It is a source of change, unexpectedness, the real generator of newness, design, even past illusion. So these two quotes are telling us about thinking, about innovation occurring out of thinking context. Now let's go back to the LUD and see how Henry Beck, not a trained designer, managed nonetheless to do this. So two big questions. How did it happen? How did we get from map to diagram? And how did the invention become an innovation? Note that separation here. Invention, you invent something, and innovation. Innovation is when it's taken up by the public. In this case, why did it immediately resonate with the public? How has it been able to last for so long? What's the secret of its success? Really two questions here, why map or diagram, and why thus? That means why in this form, the form, what we are partly interested in. What were the circumstances of the map, around 31 when Beck is working? Well, they're basically 4 or 5. London is the largest city in the world. London Underground is an institution. You'll see that in the 1920s. It was newly public and modernising. History of attempts to map the system from 1906 onwards, that has been laid into that. Henry Beck, our actor, the designer, and a largely conservative British population were beginning to be aware of and interested in modern developments. London, 6 million persons by 1900, then the largest city in the world. How do you get around a city of this size? It's the same problem in New York, of course. Now, in the late 19th century, there's a real problem of transportation. First underground railway in 1863. What the slides don't show is, of course, these are steam trains, how filthy, noisy, and generally unpleasant travelling on the steam underground railways was. Nonetheless, they were popular right from the start. But the real development comes after the 1890s, where electrical traction and rotary tunneling machines make the possible construction of the tube lines deep underground. Those funny little small English-style tube subway cars, which are built differently to New York ones. And this postcard here flaunts the new electrical systems and lightness instead of darkness. This leads to a rash of speculation. New lines are built on an individual basis, reaching out to the richer northern and western suburbs. However, inevitably costs are higher, revenue is less than is hoped. By 1908, a number of lines are close to bankruptcy. Mergers take place to begin to form a single large company. The system is only saved by government intervention, but after government intervention, a program of expansion and modernization begins. And this is very important. Modernization of the rolling stock, you can see it left, but also how the system interacted and recognized the needs of travellers. Look at the transformation in that station. From Sudbury Town as a shack looking like it has maybe one steam train a day, to Sudbury Town of 1931. And the date is quite important. This is the first of the new Piccadilly line stations, and it's coincident with Beck developing his first sketches for the LUD. Increasing standards of provision for travellers. Look at that. Upholstery, leather-clad armrests. Think when you're on the MTA, sliding on a piece of plastic or stainless steel. We have gone down in civilized standards. There's no question. There's just no question. Look at that. It's when somebody treated you with respect as a member of the public. Hark back to those days. Entrances to subways were transformed from dark and dank entrances to the underworld to light and elegant places. This is Piccadilly Station, 1926. As early as 1917, there was quite a design consciousness. In fact, the London Transport was one of the most design-aware organisations in the world before World War II. A new modernised sans serif display typeface, which was one of the grandparents of Helvetica as early as 1917. Even earlier, under Frank Pick, who became its managing director but started as their publicity manager, he commissioned, for the time, extremely radical posters. Was friends with the artists, knew them well. Often reflect the dynamism of the city, awareness of modern art and its sensibilities. Sort of popular cubism, that's E. McKnight Cowfer Wright, who is an American designer, worked in London. That boat race posters. And a real pride in what they've done. If you notice the bottom right, this is total planning of the station, but also if you look carefully at the walls in Leicester Square, it's actually a gallery, a poster gallery. They hung the posters as if they were works of art around it, because this is where the public saw modern imagery. There were no Tate moderns in those days. There was nothing. No paintings would be shown in London much later than about 1860, 1870. Occasional, or the kind of Royal Academy for academic English painting. Modern painting, as we know it, would just be virtually invisible to most people. So this is modern imaging. This goes along with a new corporate logo. Frank Pick himself helped to design this, the idea of the cut-out bullseye, which becomes a visible shorthand for the underground. That wonderful poster by Man Ray to the right, that's 1939. Really great stuff. And in design terms, by the 30s, travellers could see a determined use of high-level design input, extending even to the most humble objects. This is what's so wonderful about London Transport at that moment. The design goes right through. Posters, type, corporate logo, right through to the litter bins. Look, they actually designed them. Again, next time you're on an MTA platform with that dirty grey black lump, one per platform if you're lucky. I mean, really, look, that bus shelter, they just put some bus shelters up in Brooklyn, in my part of Brooklyn, last year that looked like that. They were up 1939. And these were all brought together in dramatic new stations for the Piccadilly line. Especially the most famous, which is Arnos Grove. And because it's architecture, they say it modelled in part on Aspern Central Library. Charles Holden went for his summer holidays to Sweden in 1929, saw the library, came home and copied it. If you did it, we'd call it plagiarism. He does it quite well, and we say wonderful. Look at this, Southgate 1936. Fabulous interior axonometric, but look at the exterior. Look how remarkably old-fashioned the cars look. Can't see it for traffic now, but it's kind of quite wonderful. This is wonderful stuff. This is cutting-edge design of the 30s. The whole offers now, the new stuff, a kind of utopian view of how public transport can be designed and organised across a city. It really is. And it's also an honorific to the public. And if you look about it too, there's a very interesting kind of passage between the engineering elements, the pure engineering elements, and the public aspects. And there isn't a sort of divide between these two. There's a kind of mediation between them. A design policy which is also a management policy. There's their new headquarters built deliberately in an American style of building. So they're big and, you know, it's their assertion of a proud organisation. And Adrian Fortin was a very good chapter on this. His book summarises this. The most striking characteristic of London transport by the late 30s was that all the parts, every station, bus, train, post, a seat and litter bin, were identifiable as the property of a single organisation. And as I said, there's this mediation between that which belongs to the passenger, you can see that on the platform, and that which belongs to engineering. What had been happening to how the system had been mapped? The first map was created in 1906 when individual lines combined to use the map to inform passengers and encourage travel. Before 1914, humour was often used to soften the image of the underground. This applied to Harris's first map. From the beginning, there are problems. Conflicting demands for geographical accuracy, clarity and persuasiveness mean the map is not as useful to the would-be traveller as might be supposed. It gets to be a jumble. It gets to be a jumble in the middle, just where you need the most clarity. And this cartoon in Punch from just before World War I satirises that, with a Londoner saying to the couple from the country, see, it's as clear as day. Leads to interesting attempts to get round the problems. By 1874, the idea of taking out geography in order to just to focus on the lines, or just make a sort of line diagram. Exploring this. But as the line expanded to the suburbs in the 1920s, an almost unsolvable problem occurs. And that is, as you expand the lines, and the size of the map stays the same, the scale of the map decreases. But as you decrease the scale, you produce more visual congestion in the central area of the city. And that's, as I've just said, exactly where you want the most clarity. That's where you need the map, in effect. You don't need it out in the burbs. By the late 20s, the problem is becoming acute. They try to map an eastern extension as well as the northern and western. They can't fit them all on. And even so, the centre is getting unbelievably congested. There's also another problem induced by the logic of the map. Cartographers want to make geographic maps. This means they hate to exclude information. But when they do, imagine trying to figure where you're going on the underground and you've got, 2 seconds to try to figure it. It's a brave attempt to map when there are just too many variables. So what's happened? The map is becoming incoherent for the traveller. There's information overload, and as a result it's ceasing to be either truly informative or persuasive or even accurate as a map. Look at the next slide. This is a map for the Metropolitan Railway, part of the underground system. The Metropolitan goes out to the suburbs to the northwest, and in this map it is showing you that on its line that goes up to the top left, focus on that line going top left, it's showing you that it's all of its stations here are just to the north of Hyde Park. So why don't you move up to these little stations up here, because they're really not very far away at all from London. So the Metropolitan's trying to encourage people to move out to these new village suburbs. But look at the actual geography. There's the map, there's the line. The line going out left on the geographically accurate rendition, that's the line. It can't even get to the end. So in other words, this map is completely, utterly not a map at all. It's a complete distortion. It greatly distorts geographical relations. It's no longer a true map. So to summarize, by 1930, existing maps of the system are neither clear, persuasive, or true. They're not satisfying the needs of travellers, nor are they accurately mapping the expansion of the system. More generally, the paradigm map is breaking down. Mapping and the needs of the travelling public are wide apart, beginning to define the design opportunity. One proof of this is repeated attempts in the 20s to solve this by map diagram compromises. Here's one from 1917, on the London and North Eastern Railway trying to diagramatise its suburban lines in the late 1920s. Problem is not confined to London. Here's attempts to solve the same problem in Berlin in the 1920s. Including the first, probably truly schematic diagram, which is contemporaneous with Beck's, which is this 1931 diagram at bottom right for the S-Bahn in Berlin. So the London Underground tried to deal with this problem with simplification, but Stingmore's map of 1932, although clearer than some of the versions, is a confession of failure, becoming impossible to have comprehensiveness, geographical accuracy, clarity, and persuasiveness in a single map. So, enter Beck, 1931. Beck is our actor. Man who designs the underground diagram and works on it for 26 years. He has what sounds like a very simple ambition. He says, all I wanted to do really was to tidy it up, straightening the lines, experimenting the diagonals, evening out the distances. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became the idea was worth trying. So that's all he wanted to do. He thought that the Stingmore's map was a bit like spaghetti, and he wanted to put a little bit of clarity. In reality, the question is much more complicated. How does a breakdown in a paradigm become the starting point for innovation? And how does a designer acquire the courage to reframe the problem in a wholly new way? Two things we need to know here. More about Harry Beck. We need to think a little bit more about design and innovation. Let's begin from the second point. Two things